Welcome to the Hormone Optimizing Warrior MD, your reliable and trusted source for information on hormone therapy for menopause and beyond, and on how to advance into the second half of your life with confidence and optimism, knowing your hormones are optimized and balanced with everything else in your body. Whether it is hormone therapy, peptide therapy, laser therapy, or some other new technology applicable to maintaining our vitality, mental and physical strength, you will hear all about it in this podcast. Hello, listener. I am going to pick up where I left off last week. In the previous episode, I spoke about what osteoporosis is and why women are much more prone to osteoporosis than men. I highlighted the fact that it's not just that as women age and menopause hits, they lose their estrogen, but there's also the fact that women have thinner, smaller, and more fragile bones. And also due to the fact that many women enter menopause with a very serious handicap, which is the inability to achieve peak bone mass due to a variety of reasons, some of which might be things that they haven't considered could apply to them. For example, the use of birth control when they were young. I also spoke about the hormonal impact on bone remodeling. I discussed osteoblasts and osteoclasts, the cells that build bone and destroy bone, cells whose activity have to be in a constant and continuous optimal balance in order to maintain the strength and the normal structure of the bone. This is just as a quick reminder. In the previous week, I also discussed that there are 3 anabolic hormones, estrogen, testosterone, and growth hormone. And unfortunately, the top reason women are so much more at risk for osteoporosis than men after the age of 50 is because at menopause, women lose not just their estrogen, which is one of the most important anabolic bone-supporting hormones they have. They have already lost their testosterone 5-10 years prior to menopause, maybe even longer. And on top of all that, women enter the 5th decade of their lives with about 50% of the growth hormone they used to have when they were much younger. And Lord and behold, we don't need growth hormone just to grow. We actually need growth hormone to support bone mass and muscle mass and to burn off fat. And to add insult to injury, women continue to lose growth hormone as they age and approach the end of their lives. So in this episode, I'd like to address some of the questions that I posed at the beginning of last episode. And the reason why I'm, again, not just diving into the osteoporosis treatment and what we can do to prevent it right off the bat is because if you do not understand what causes or worsens osteoporosis, you will literally not be able to meaningfully fix it. The magic modern osteoporosis drugs we are offered today as a pill, an injection, or an intravenous infusion, turns out they are not magic at all. And they come with very significant negative consequences, which are constantly minimized by the physicians who prescribe them or recommend them to you. So you should be informed about what actually meaningfully improves osteoporosis, and it is safe to use for a long time. So first of all, should you be scared about osteoporosis? As I pointed out in the last episode, our bones keep us moving. And only someone who has lost temporarily or permanently the use of one limb or lost their mobility and had to use a mobility-assisted device like a wheelchair, crutches, or just a boot can appreciate the frustration, the disappointment, the powerlessness that comes with the inability of having a body that is either temporarily or permanently unable to do the same daily activities it used to do before whatever event caused the loss of mobility. I said that because a fracture of a bone is a very serious thing. It's not just a temporary nuisance or inconvenience. Yes, you will heal from it. Yes, you will get better. But a fracture, it's a signal that something is happening to your bone strength, especially and specifically when a fracture happens in the context of minimal trauma, like you tripped on the stairs, you fell, or you lost your balance and you fell. Most of the times, it's just a simple fall. I have seen women who are so scared by their diagnosis of osteoporosis and scared of the risk of fracture because they're told, hey, you have osteoporosis, it's pretty severe, you can break a bone really easily, that they're fearful of doing the one thing that could literally help them, which is exercise. Go to the gym, lift weights, work with weights, or a combination of all of the above. And I've seen women who are completely unfazed by the diagnosis of osteoporosis or their risk factors. And more so, I've seen women who refuse to get tested. I have had one patient come back after I gave her a bone density scan order and give me an article whose message was pretty clear. Bone density screening for osteoporosis is a scam to sell more osteoporosis medications. Now, these are two opposing extremes. And unfortunately, many times when it comes to treatment, even when it comes to diagnosis, to look for a serious medical condition with serious implications, it simply comes down to what a woman is literally willing to do. And that is always based on her beliefs. And those beliefs, believe it or not, are always influenced by what they hear and they read online. And some things resonate with women more than others. Then they refuse to be tested, or they refuse treatment, or they're so afraid of the diagnosis that they don't want to engage in any activity at all, thinking they're increasing their risk of fracture. Now, I will come back to the topic of belief a little bit when I discuss osteoporosis treatment options. But for now, I want to continue the discussion on what's the best way to find out if you have osteoporosis or you are at risk to develop it. In this episode, I'm going to answer the question of how do we diagnose it and how do we screen for osteoporosis? How often should we screen, and who is the best candidate to screen for osteoporosis? And do all women need to be tested? Or when should they start testing? Some of these questions might actually have to be pushed into next week, depending on how much time we have, but let me get started. How do we screen for osteoporosis? And how do we diagnose it promptly and early enough in order to meaningfully impact bone strength? Whether we want to preserve it or improve it, it doesn't really matter. Now, screening for osteoporosis and diagnosing osteoporosis is very, very simple. It involves a trip to the imaging center where you need to have a radiological test done, an imaging test. It's called the DEXA scan. DEXA means dual X-ray absorptiometry. This is a type of X-ray that literally measures bone density, very low-level radiation X-ray. Normally, this is done for the spine and the hips. But what I've lately noticed on the reports is for a large variety of patients, only one hip is being tested, even though the order says spine and hips. The reason why that matters is because 50% of women who are tested after the age of 50 for osteoporosis have different bone density in their right and left hips. Maybe it's not 50%, but this is what I observed in my practice. It might be less, it might be more. And that happens because these women have some mobility issues and likely osteoarthritis or inflammatory arthritis or some kind of an injury. And usually the inflammatory changes in the joint are in one of the major joints of the leg, either the knee or the hip, very rarely the ankle, but it impacts the woman's weight bearing. Therefore, she tends to favor the healthy leg, not the one that hurts. It doesn't show as a limp, but it shows as a discrepancy in the bone density, with the hip on the side that has the problem showing greater bone loss than the side who is bearing the load much better and probably a little bit extra. Now, sometimes something as simple as this will point out to a very serious process that's happening in a major joint that needs to be addressed before it actually becomes a serious problem or a source of serious mobility impairment with a possible risk of chronic disability. Coming back to osteoporosis, it affects the bones of the spine and the hips differently in different women. in the sense that some women have significant osteoporosis of the spine, but they barely have a hint of osteopenia in their hip bones. And on the contrary, the other women have normal bone density in their spine only to develop bone loss in their hips. But the majority of women do have osteoporosis in both the hips and the spine. I mentioned osteopenia, and let me clarify, because most women that I explained the DEXA findings to do not know their osteoporosis number or the bone density number. And honestly, you should. If you are diabetic, you know your hemoglobin A1C, which is your overall sugar control number. It's the number that determines your risk of complications. It's the number that tells you your longevity. Similarly, the T-score is something that any woman should know. Your T-score is 0, wonderful. We'll talk about what that means. But any woman with bone loss should know her T-score. This is how the bone density is reported, in the form of a score that's either 0 or below 0. It will never be plus. What does this T-score show? When it's 0, it means you have the same bone mass as a young adult. So when compared to a younger adult, your bone mass is the same. That means you have good bone mass and strength. You are not losing any bone mass. You have a pre-pass. You're good to go. You probably, at this point, do not need to screen for osteoporosis again unless you develop risk factors. You become immobile. You suddenly stop using hormone therapy. You stop exercising for whatever reason. There's some changes on your blood testing with elevated calcium, which suggests possible parathyroid hormone problems, in which case there should be retesting done at about 1 to 2 years. But otherwise, you're good to go, probably for 3 to 5 years. Now, when the T-score is reported with a minus, it means you're losing bone strength and your bone density is less than that expected of a young adult. Your bones are weakening, and the severity of that weakening is indicated by how high your number is. When your T-score is minus 2.5, it signals you have met the target criteria for what marks the beginning of osteoporosis. So if your T-score is between 0 and minus 2.5, you have osteopenia. Osteopenia is the beginning of bone loss, the weakening of your bone strength and density, not to the point where your bones are considered fragile enough to increase the risk of a fracture and meet the definition of osteoporosis. But osteopenia is a clear alarm signal. And unfortunately, the majority of women fail to recognize it or act on it, and they're simply reassured by the fact that they don't have osteoporosis. They're like, oh, yes, thank you, doc. I don't have osteoporosis. That's great. Not focusing on this alarm signal. Hey, you don't have osteoporosis, but you have osteopenia is a mistake. When your T-score identifies osteopenia, you need to repeat that bone density within no longer than 2 years. When your T-score indicates osteoporosis, then you should repeat the test within 1 year and definitely act on it. So you want to see how the treatment that you are implementing is going to actually impact your bone density and whether or not it is improving. We want to consider looking into whether a woman has osteoporosis or not, maybe around the age of menopause. Personally, I would like to know what a woman's bone density is at the age of 40, because perhaps that is her actual real baseline. There are women who continue to lose bone mass during perimenopause. They have mood swings, cravings, weight gain, they stop exercising the same way, and their hormones decline. Not just the mechanical load on the bones, but the hormone balance that maintains the bone mass will actually become a factor. So I would recommend that women get tested at the age of 40. Once you enter menopause, a decade later, I'd like to know what perimenopause did to your body, what perimenopause did to your bones specifically. And If you're in good shape, both at 40 and at 50, and you decide to use hormone therapy, you probably don't need to get tested again until age 55 or 60. If, on the other hand, you have never been tested, age 60 is probably where you want to consider the latest target in time for testing. And that is the current standard recommendation, to test at the age of 60, unless a woman has risk factors or a strong family history, in which case the testing is at the discretion of the physician and at the desire of the patient. Now, I'm going to talk about, once we diagnose osteopenia or osteoporosis with a bone density test, what do we do next? Well, we need to identify the cause in order to meaningfully address osteoporosis. We need some form of workup. That should take place immediately when osteoporosis is diagnosed and whenever osteopenia is identified. Simply taking some calcium with vitamin D3 and exercising more might just slow down and delay the inevitable, and we still need to understand why osteopenia and osteoporosis is happening. Throwing a vitamin at it, it's not going to be enough. In today's episode, I want to provide you with a simple list for bone loss investigation, or as the doctors like to call it, the workup. So pay attention. Your doctor will need to start checking the calcium and the parathyroid hormone levels, the phosphorus levels, because remember in the first episode, when I talked about osteoporosis causes, I explained that hormonal changes, including parathyroid hormone abnormalities, will cause osteoporosis. So we need to rule that out. Then your doctor should check your hormones. IGF-1 is how we evaluate growth hormone. The growth hormone release is pulsatile and impossible to track accurately with a simple blood test, so we test insulin growth factor 1. You will need to know your estradiol levels. I spoke in the last episode about where the estradiol levels need to be in order to maintain bone mass. Very valuable information there. Perhaps you go back and listen if you don't remember. But you need to know your estradiol levels. And more importantly, because you're probably on a medication, if you are doing hormone therapy, that takes your estrogen from a point of 0 or under 30 to somewhere no higher than maybe 100. And then it comes right back down. And that's done with the patch every 2 to 3 days, with the gel or the bioidentical cream every day. Now, the FSH is a very valuable hormone indicator of your overall estrogen status, because there are studies who were done in the 1990s showing that the estrogen levels should be between 60 and maybe 90 in order for adequate bone mass formation and maintaining the bone mass. Well, only the patch that's above 0.05 milligrams would give you that. And if you're using a cream or a gel, the level of the estradiol might be above 60 to 90, mainly 8 hours or 12 hours of your 24-hour interval until you apply the cream the next day. So your FSH is valuable to tell you whether or not the hormonal treatment is probably going to make an impact on your bones. You will also need to know your testosterone level. We do not have a known testosterone level where we think your bone mass is going to be better. There's not enough research on this topic for me to provide you with a reliable number. But most likely, if you are doing testosterone therapy and your testosterone is over 100 consistently, considering this is a valuable anabolic hormone, and if you do exercise, it's safe to assume you are going to get better results on your next bone density scan. Now, 100 needs to be consistent over 100. So only the pellet or the injection will give you that, not the testosterone cream. Next, the DHEA, the pregnenolone, and the fasting morning cortisol are needed to understand what is happening to your adrenal gland. This can help you uncover whether or not you have high surges in cortisol, which, as we discussed, chronic stress and chronic elevations in cortisol will increase the risk of osteoporosis. In last week's episode, I also talked about the value of thyroid hormones. And one of the possible causes for osteoporosis is hyperthyroidism, or a woman that's hypothyroid being treated with thyroid medication and taking too much. So a workup for osteoporosis needs to include a complete thyroid panel with antibodies for Hashimoto. And last but not least, there should be a measurement of your body mass composition, highlighting the weight of your skeletal muscle mass compared to the total weight of your fat, and ultimately body fat percentage, which can help you guide your further actions on what to do with this data. If you remember what I discussed in last week's episode regarding the hormones involved in bone remodeling, it makes an absolute, complete, total sense to do a full workup for all your hormones. Your doctor needs to identify what are the imbalances, what are the deficiencies, and possible issues that are deep at play that could be easily influenced and reversed in order to address osteoporosis adequately and effectively. One of the things that's considered less important by many is the amount of muscle mass an individual woman possesses. Women do not come into the office asking, "Hey doc, what's my muscle mass?" But they should. When it comes to bone density, this number is very important. Why? Because you can reverse and correct osteoporosis simply by increasing the mechanical load on your bones, which many women successfully do by adjusting the exercise. And I'll talk more about that when I get to the treatment. But if you did not know this, let me spell it out for you. The mechanical load on your bones is very important in maintaining your bone strength or building new bone. So someone who sits very, very long time during the day or drives for long hours and works in front of a computer after they arrive at work versus someone who works standing, moving from place to place, being very active, they will have probably very different bone density, as the person who moves more will probably have better bone density than the person who sits and doesn't move. And since I was talking about the muscle, let me tell you what helps you with the biology of the mechanical load, your muscle, because that's what determines how much mechanical load you can bear and determines the forces exerted upon your bones. And that's what ultimately impacts your bone density the most. When it comes to what has the most powerful outcome on your bone mass, you need to consider that biology will always win. What I mean by that is our body is already designed with biological mechanisms of repair and safety to maintain the bone mass. So staying strong and powerful and keeping as much weight on our bones, applying as much weight on them as possible, is going to be what protects our bones. If the muscles are weak, our bones will be weak. Your muscles are required not just to move your bones and ultimately your body, but they're also required to keep you balanced and to allow you to bear your weight and any additional weight you need. Your muscles allow you to carry, to lift, to push, and pull different objects throughout the day. So if you are already thin and have very little body fat, that's great. Everybody wants that, right? We're all women, let's be honest. We all want that. But if your muscles are weaker than they should be, or your muscle mass has declined over time, it does not matter really how good you look in a tight dress. Unfortunately, the muscle mass will decline during menopause and after menopause as a woman ages, and it declines even more the older we are. And that's when we are mostly at risk for a fracture. So not only do we lose hormones, we get more sedentary, we get older, we also lose our muscle mass, which helps us carry the load, balance the load of our body better. And if we don't pay attention, we are unfortunately more and more at risk for fractures as we get older. I will continue in next week's episode with some funny story that I was going to share this week, but I'm running out of time, about me and Scarlett and what happened on one of our walks. And it is related to the muscle mass, by the way. So stay tuned, and I will come back next week with the topic of osteoporosis dissected in depth for your benefit. So when you need to make a decision on what is going to help your osteoporosis, you are going to make a smart decision. Thank you for the time and energy you spent listening to my podcast. If this episode or another have caught your attention and delivered valuable information you have not heard anywhere else, and if you feel I have succeeded in my mission to provide the how to stay healthy and age beautifully, please leave me a review. And any suggestion to improve the podcast will help make it better for you and for others. You can send my staff a message directly by sending an email to receptionist@herahealthcare.info.